Did you know there are 16 kings and queens buried in this one incredible room in Westminster Abbey? And I bet you can't name them all. Not to worry though, because if you keep watching, I'll do it for you. And I'll also explain why the true number might be 15, how 2 women who weren't even queens of England ended up in here, why the burials didn't all take place in the order that these people's deaths did, and why some have incredible tombs, while others are lucky to have a faded plaque on the floor. This is the tale of the most prestigious royal burials in the Henry VII Lady Chapel, and of who's buried with the Tudors. The Henry VII Chapel, with its incredible fan-vaulted ceiling, was built on the orders of, you guessed it, Henry VII, King of England, and it was constructed between 1503 and 1516. Although it is easy to think that it consists only of the central aisle, in actual fact the chapel also includes the north and south aisles, which are partitioned off from the rest of it by stalls. Make no mistake though, they are all part of the same room, which is why you can see the flags in the centre aisle from the north and south aisles as well, because they aren't separated by walls. By the time it was completed, it already held the remains of the first 2 people on our list today, Henry VII's Queen, Elizabeth of York, and Henry himself. Elizabeth had died after childbirth complications in the Tower of London on the 11th of February 1503, her 37th birthday. Her baby girl, Princess Catherine Tudor, died too. As the vault in which the Queen now lies did not yet exist, she was initially buried in a side chapel, then moved to her final resting place later on. The inscription on her tomb reads, "Here lies Queen Elizabeth, daughter of the former King Edward IV, sister of the formerly appointed King Edward V, once the wife of King Henry VII and the renowned mother of Henry VIII. She met her day of death in the Tower of London on the 11th day of February in the year of our Lord 1502, having fulfilled the age of 37 years. The year 1502 is given because the old Julian calendar was then in use in England, which took the new year as the 25th of March. In 1509, Elizabeth was joined by her husband, who had died on the 21st of April that year, and they now lie under a spectacular monument which shows them both lying down, hands clasped in prayer. The inscription on the tomb for Henry reads, "Here lies Henry VII of that name, formerly King of England, son of Edmund, Earl of Richmond. He was created king on August 22nd, and immediately afterwards, on October 30th, he was crowned at Westminster in the year of our Lord 1485. He died subsequently on April 21st in the 53rd year of his age. He reigned 23 years, 8 months, less 1 day. I find the phrase created king an interesting little bit of diplomacy. Henry seized the crown at the Battle of Bosworth after killing Richard III, but his tomb smooths over the violence of that day, because history is written by the winners. It would be decades before another king or queen was laid to rest in the chapel, for the couple's son, Henry VIII, was interred in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, and none of his 6 wives were buried in the Henry VII Chapel, though one, Anne of Cleves, does rest elsewhere in the Abbey in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it tomb near Poets' Corner. Finally, in the summer of 1553, with the death of Henry VIII's 15-year-old son, Edward VI, the chapel got its next monarch. He was laid to rest at the head of his grandparents' tomb, and his grave now has an altar over the top of it, with his name appearing on a much later floor plaque a little way off. His vault is tiny, at only 7.5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, and it holds only him. When the Victorians looked into it in 1869, they saw that his lead coffin was, quote, rent and deformed as well as wasted by long corrosion, and perhaps injured by having been examined before. See my video all about his death and burial to learn more, including how we know that the Cromwellians had opened up his tomb during the 1640s. It was a little over 5 years after his own death that Edward's sister, Mary I, joined him and their grandparents in the chapel, though she was buried in the north aisle in a tomb now topped by an effigy of her sister, Elizabeth I, which makes almost no mention of Mary, save one line which says, "Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of the resurrection." She is also named in a plaque in the floor, which, like Edward's, was added centuries later. Her sister obviously didn't care about marking her grave any more than Mary had cared about putting up a monument to their brother, father, or even her own mother, Catherine of Aragon, though in her will she asked that Elizabeth would disinter Catherine and lay her next to Mary, but spoiler alert, Elizabeth didn't bother. In fact, after Henry VII, the Tudors were very good at looking forwards, not back, and the rest of their burials would now be totally unmarked if not for the efforts of others. The best I can say about Elizabeth is that she did have the stones from the Catholic altars, which were taken down in 1561, laid over the top of her sister's grave, but these are now long gone. Now we come to Gloriana herself, Queen Elizabeth I. She died in March 1603, aged 69, leaving behind no instructions as to what to do with her body, which was initially buried in the same vault as her grandparents. Her throne was inherited by her distant cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, and it was he who, with a bit of encouragement from his advisors, built the huge memorial to Elizabeth in the North Aisle and had her remains moved there to lie with her sister in 1606. Elizabeth's coffin was placed on top of Mary's, which I can pretty much guarantee you Mary would have hated. The effigy has been damaged and repaired over the centuries, and older images of it show that Elizabeth was initially dressed in ermine robes, while her crown, orb, sceptre, and collar are 20th century replacements or additions. Why did James create this monument, you might ask, when he apparently wasn't too keen to do so? Well, I think it's because he was made to see the political benefits of such an action. Not only was he flattering the English by showing respect to Elizabeth, he was also hammering home his blood connection to her and therefore his right to her crown, which she hadn't actually left him and which the will of Henry VIII said ought to have gone to the descendants of his, Henry's, younger sister Mary, rather than his elder sister Margaret, who was James's great-grandmother. Nothing makes James's motives plainer, I think, than the inscription on Elizabeth's tomb, which emphasises her Tudor and Plantagenet bloodlines shared by him, and which reads, "To the eternal memory of Elizabeth, Queen of England, France and Ireland, daughter of King Henry VIII, granddaughter of King Henry VII, great-granddaughter to King Edward IV, mother of her country, a nursing mother to religion and all liberal sciences, skilled in many languages, adorned with excellent endowments both of body and mind, and excellent for princely virtues beyond her sex. James, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland, hath devoutly and justly erected this monument to her whose virtues and kingdoms he inherits." As with Edward, I have a whole video on her death and burial and the secrets of this incredible tomb, which goes into far more detail than I have time to do here, including a description of the two coffins as seen in 1869. I'll leave it linked for you. It wasn't just Elizabeth who James built a huge memorial to. In a further effort to demonstrate his links to the Tudor dynasty and right to the throne, over on the south aisle of the chapel, he had an even larger one created for his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, the woman from whom he had, of course, inherited his claim to the English crown. Now, Mary had been executed back in 1587 on Elizabeth's orders for plotting to steal the throne, and she had initially been buried in Peterborough Cathedral. It was only in 1612 that her son had her moved to the much more prestigious Westminster Abbey, making her one of the few monarchs to be buried in the Henry VII Chapel long after she died. In 1619, James's wife, Anne of Denmark, passed away, and her husband had her interred in a tiny side chapel to the northeast of the Henry VII and Elizabeth of York vault and memorial. There was no marker on her grave, and it ended up lost for centuries until the Victorians, who really loved digging up the abbey floor and having a nosy into the vaults, rediscovered her by accident. They were then able to identify her by the following inscription on her brass coffin plate, and this is a translation from the Latin. The most serene Queen Anne, wife of James, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland, daughter of Frederick II, King of Denmark, Norway, the Vandals and the Goths, sister of Christian IV and mother of many princes, is laid to rest here. She died at Hampton Court in the year of salvation 1619, on the 4th day before the nones of March, in the 44th year of her age, in the 4th month, on the 18th day. There is now a plaque in the floor over her grave, reading Anne of Denmark, Queen of King James I, 1619, however, it's mostly hidden by an organ. A few years later, her husband suffered the same ignominious fate of being buried and forgotten about. James died in 1625, and apparently in the interests of not squandering the opportunity to reinforce his connections to the Tudors once again, he was buried in Elizabeth I's original resting place, the tomb of her grandparents and his great-great-grandparents, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. When the tomb was opened up in the 1860s, their 3 coffins could be seen lying side by side. To this day, there is no official marker on the tomb to tell people that James is in there, though, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. Apparently his heir, Charles I, was as unbothered about marking the final resting places of his nearest and dearest as the Tudors had mostly been. Now, if you look at Westminster Abbey's website, it actually says that there are only 15 kings and queens buried in the Henry VII Lady Chapel, but I've told you that I believe there are as many as 16. So who did they forget? Well, I think it's James I's daughter, Elizabeth Stuart, Queen of Bohemia. Nor do I think they omitted her because she wasn't a Queen of England, given that they do discuss Mary Queen of Scots. I believe it's just a little oversight. Elizabeth was born in 1596 and married Frederick V, Count Palatine of the Rhine and Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, in 1613. They later became the King and Queen of Bohemia in 1619, when Frederick was offered and accepted its crown, but he was deposed just a year later and the family forced into exile. He died in 1632. By the time of her own death, nearly 30 years later, the former Queen Elizabeth was back in her homeland of England, where her nephew Charles II was then on the throne. She died on the 13th of February 1662, probably from bronchitis, and was buried in the Abbey on the 17th of that same month in her grandmother Mary Queen of Scots' vault, and also next to her long-dead brother Prince Henry Stuart, who should have been King Henry IX, but who had died as a teenager in 1612. For the next interment I'm going to discuss, we have to backtrack all the way into the Plantagenet era and to one of the darkest chapters in the Wars of the Roses. The year was 1483, and when Edward IV died unexpectedly that April, the crown was inherited by his eldest son, the 12-year-old Edward V. He was quickly declared illegitimate and deposed by his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, however, who became Richard III, and young Edward and his little brother, the 9-year-old Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, disappeared into the Tower of London that summer and after a few weeks were never seen again. Debate as to their exact fate has raged ever since. I think Richard III had them killed, but I know that's a controversial opinion for many. However, in 1674, 2 sets of bones, apparently of children of about the correct ages, were discovered beneath a staircase in the central White Tower, which is roughly in the middle of the whole tower complex. 3 years later, in 1677, Francis Sandford published the following account of the discovery, having obtained his information from 2 pretty well-placed and reputable sources, John Knight, the principal surgeon to Charles II, and Sir Thomas Chicheley, Master of the Ordnance. Speaking about the 17th of July, 1674, he said, "Take this relation from a gentleman, an eye-witness and principally concerned in the whole scrutiny. In order to the rebuilding of the several offices in the tower, and to clear the White Tower from all contiguous buildings, digging down the stairs which led from the king's lodgings to the chapel in the said tower, about 10 foot in the ground, were found the bones of 2 striplings in, as it seemed, a wooden chest, which upon the survey were found proportionable to the ages of those 2 brothers, viz. about 13 and 11 years. Those ages are wrong, as the boys were 12 and 9, almost 10, but they're close enough. The skull of the one being entire, the other broken, as were indeed many of the other bones, as also the chest, by the violence of the labourers, who not being sensible of what they had in hand, cast the rubbish and them away together, wherefore they were caused to sift the rubbish, and by that means preserved all the bones. The circumstances from the story being considered, and the same often discoursed with the Right Honourable Sir Thomas Chichley, Knight, Master of the Ordnance, by whose industry the new buildings were then in carrying on, and by whom this matter was reported to the King, upon the presumption that these were the bones of the said princes. Believing them to be the lost boys, who have gone down in history as the princes in the Tower, even though one of them was actually a king, Charles II later had them interred in an urn in the north aisle of the Henry VII Chapel, a few feet away from where Mary I and Elizabeth I lie. The urn was given the following inscription: "Here under lie interred the remains of Edward V, King of England, and of Richard, Duke of York, which two brothers their uncle Richard, who usurped the crown, shut up in the Tower of London, smothered them with pillows, and ordered them to be dishonourably and secretly buried, whose long desired and much sought for bones, after above 190 years, were found by most certain tokens, we don't know what these were, deep interred under the rubbish of the stairs that led up into the chapel of the White Tower, on the 17th of July in the year of our Lord 1674. Charles II, a most merciful prince, having compassion upon their hard fortune, performed the funeral rites of these unhappy princes amongst the tombs of their ancestors, Anno Domini 1678 being the 30th of his reign." Now, I'm on the fence about whether these bones are actually the young Edward and Richard or not, and if you want to hear my thoughts on whether a DNA analysis of them could answer this question, see my video on that topic, along with several other videos I have on the boys, linked below for you. What is beyond dispute is that they are interred under the two boys' names, and it might indeed be true that the bones of Edward V are in the urn. As we aren't sure though, this is the one burial on my list of 16 which we might discount, taking the total down to 15. Back to the Stuarts now, for our next tranche of monarch and consort burials. Helpfully, the remainder of the relevant members of that family are all together in a vault in the south aisle, close to their famous and scandalous progenitrix, Mary Queen of Scots. Charles II died in February 1685 after a really horrible final illness which demonstrated why one was truly better off without the attentions of 17th century doctors. He was buried with no grand tomb, instead only eventually getting a small plaque on the floor, which I completely missed the last time I was in the Abbey and only found because I asked a staff member where to go so that I could circle back and get a photograph of it. His wife isn't here, by the way, because after his death, the Portuguese Catherine of Braganza went home and died there in 1705. The other Stuarts in the tomb fared no better than Charles when it came to recognition, as they each only have a little floor marker too. Lying with him is his niece, Mary II, who became joint monarch with her husband/cousin William III in 1689, after they effectively deposed Mary's father and Charles's brother, James II. She died of smallpox in December 1694 at the age of just 32. William came next, dying in 1702 at the age of 52, after a slightly strange accident involving a horse and a mole, which you can hear all about in my video on his death. As he and Mary had had no children, the throne passed to her sister, Queen Anne, who ruled until 1714 and became the last of the Stuarts to be placed in the vault. By the way, her husband, Prince George of Denmark, who died in 1708, is in there too, but he doesn't qualify for this list as he wasn't a king. We now enter the Hanoverian era for the final king and queen buried in this chapel, and we also come back out into the centre aisle, where the Hanoverian vault is located in front of those containing Henry VII, Elizabeth of York, James I and Edward VI. The first of these two to expire was Caroline of Ansbach, wife of George II. She died a hideous death in 1737 at the age of 54, but was then given quite a romantic burial by her husband, who insisted that the side of her coffin be removable so that when he died too, the side of his could be taken out as well, and their bones and dust could mingle together forever. He got his wish. When he passed away in 1760, aged 76, that's exactly what was done, and the two of them are still down there, surrounded by many other lower-ranked Hanoverian royals, mouldering away together in their joint coffin. And people say romance is dead. There are no monuments to them, though, for like the Stuarts, who had immediately preceded them, their burials are marked only by plaques in the floor. See my video on Caroline's death and burial to learn all the gory details of her demise and the funny yet wildly inappropriate thing her husband said to her as she lay dying about what he was going to do for female company going forwards. So let's do a quick sum up for you. We've got Henry VII and Elizabeth of York in the centre aisle under a huge monument depicting them praying. Their grandson Edward VI is at the head of their tomb. Their granddaughters Mary and Elizabeth are in the north aisle under a large effigy of Elizabeth, and their great-granddaughter Mary Queen of Scots is over in the south aisle under an even larger effigy of herself. That's 6 so far. Anne of Denmark is also in the centre aisle in a little side chapel, and her husband James is in with Henry and Elizabeth. Their daughter Elizabeth of Bohemia is in the south aisle with her grandmother. We're up to 9. Centuries after his apparent death, the supposed remains of our 10th royal, Edward V, plus his little brother, were placed in an urn in the north aisle. Then the decades between 1685 and 1714 saw the arrival in the Stuart vault over in the south aisle of Charles II, Mary II, William III and Queen Anne. Our 15th and 16th sets of remains belong to the husband and wife team that was Caroline of Ansbach and George II, and they are back out in the centre aisle in the Hanoverian vault. Most of those on the list have no memorial, instead getting only a plaque in the floor, if they were lucky. Phew, that brings us to the end of this list of dead monarchs and consorts buried in the first Tudor king's spectacular chapel. Thank you for watching, and do let me know in the comments which of these kings and queens is your favourite to learn about. I'd be very grateful if you would give the video a like and subscribe to the channel too if you haven't already, as this shows YouTube my content is good quality and helps to promote it. If you activate the notification bell, you'll also be alerted to all my latest uploads. If you want more history from me, you can also join my YouTube channel membership by clicking the join button under videos and following the on-screen instructions. Or you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/historycalling and join up there to get extra perks ranging from bonus podcasts to early access to ad-free videos, recommendations for other great history content on the web, and your name in my monthly patron lists, depending on which tier you join. A lot of my posts are also available as one-time purchases in my Patreon shop if you don't fancy a monthly subscription. You can also buy my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors, online as a paperback and ebook from Amazon. It's linked below too. Thank you very much to those of you who support me using the thanks button underneath videos as well, as this is very much appreciated. But if you're unable to support financially, which is totally fine, I know not everyone can or wants to, but would still like some bonus material, sign up to my free mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, to get 2 complimentary downloads right away about spotting good history books and interviewing family members about your family tree, plus my monthly newsletter. I'll leave that link below for you, and you can of course unsubscribe at any time. If you want to learn more about the deaths and burials of many of the people mentioned in this video, plus some others, then I recommend you open up the description box and take a look at the links I've left for you there to many of my other videos. If you want my personal recommendation though, then I would say try one of these options and you can't go wrong. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.